What's it like watching Classic Who for the first time? It's pretty fun actually. I'm enjoying myself. The first serial, An Unearthly Child, was a delightful watch, introducing us to a brand new concept as well as a cast of characters with deep conflict between them. This conflict is deepened even more in the serial we're about to discuss today, originally entitled The Mutants. This serial is the most important story ever told in Doctor Who history, as it introduces a creature that would become one of the most recognisable and fearsome villains of all time. No, I'm not talking about the Absorbaloff. I'm talking about the Daleks. This episode was written by Terry Nation, creator of the Daleks, directed by Christopher Barry and Richard Martin, and was produced by Verity Lambert. This story aired from the 21st of December 1963 to the 1st of February 1964, spanning 7 episodes. The first part of the Daleks is ominously named The Dead Planet, and it continues where we left off in the previous serial, with the TARDIS's Geiger counter reaching the danger zone. I noted in the previous video that the Doctor's personal Geiger counter had been destroyed when he was kidnapped, so the radiation danger would go unnoticed for some time. Part of me wonders why the Doctor doesn't have spares of all of his gadgets and gizmos. But equally, that would have solved most of the issues in this story, and then we'd have no story, and then we'd have no Daleks, and then we'd have no Doctor Who. So, honestly, at this point, it's probably better that we have all of these plot holes. So we finally got to explore the jungle-like environment outside the TARDIS, which was actually quite exciting. A far cry from the sandy cave environments of the last serial, we're brought to a weird location with strange-looking plants. It didn't take long before the Doctor decreed they were in a petrified jungle. Effectively, everything has been turned to stone. But by what? We don't know just yet, but let's just say this probably should have been the first red flag that this place was not the ideal place to pit stop for the night. This is when the Doctor and the gang determined that they're no longer on Earth, which marks the first time the show has explored an alien planet. I was half expecting Barbara to say, "We ain't in London no more, Ian," but I feel like cultural references aren't quite Doctor Who's bag yet. Either way, Ian and Barbara engage in a conversation that is particularly interesting as they lament the fact that the Doctor informed them he cannot easily take them home, and therefore they're trapped along for the ride until they can somehow return to 1963. Something's telling me this won't happen for a long time, but equally that's because I know when these characters leave the show. Sorry. Spoilers. The gang stumbles upon a futuristic looking city, which actually looked incredibly intricate. I paused the episode to take a closer look and came to the conclusion this city must have been made as a miniature model, which explains why all of the shots of the city look so realistic and cool. Also, knowing what planet we've landed on, I immediately began questioning what the name of the city was, and the conclusion I came to was Dalek City. I know it's not catchy in the slightest, but at least you know what you're getting. Either way, the Doctor wants to explore the mysterious city, but the rest of the gang wants to go back to the TARDIS where it's safe. Where's your sense of adventure, guys? It's not like you've just had a traumatic experience that you want to forget and don't want to repeat again. Oh, wait. As they're meandering their way back to the TARDIS, Susan stumbles upon a crystallized flower. And while she's busy being a botanist, she feels something place a hand on her shoulder. When she turns around and screams twice, there's no one there. It was a little spooky and it definitely caught me off guard, especially when this planet is supposedly dead. Was it a Dalek? Was it another group of people? Who touched Susan? Wait, that actually sounded a lot dirtier than I wanted it to, but you get what I mean. There's also a moment where it looks like everyone is getting ready to go to sleep when someone appears to be knocking on the TARDIS door. However, the scanner shows that nobody is there. Yeah, this is turning out to have quite the creepy mystery attached to it. Right, are we ready to learn some more about the TARDIS? Shall we start with the age-old question about what does the Doctor eat? Well, he has his own food machine. I don't actually know how it works, but you plug in a code and it delivers a chunk of food that tastes like the food you've asked for. For instance, Bacon and egg requires the code XL4285J. I found myself wondering why this was so familiar to me, and I remembered this is very similar to the chewing gum in Willy Wonka. I did some research, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory actually came out less than a month after this episode aired. What a crazy coincidence. I'm not sure if this food machine makes another appearance in the show, but its inclusion in this episode certainly raised my eyebrows. Are you ready for another bit of TARDIS lore? I know you are. I know you're excited. After the TARDIS fails to whoosh whoosh, the Doctor reveals that the fluid link needed to take off requires more mercury, and unfortunately, the only way to get mercury is by exploring the city. How convenient. So you're telling me that the Doctor wanted to explore the city and then the TARDIS can't take off, meaning they now have to go to the city in order for them to take off. Something feels off, but you know what? I'm going to let it slide because I am excited to explore this metropolis. Also, this fluid link is about to become the biggest issue in this story. Honestly, it causes so many issues. So, do you remember that knock that I spoke about earlier? Well, when they emerged from the TARDIS, they found a metal box containing glass vials of some liquid. The gang treated this box like a bomb at first, which was overly cautious, but equally, I probably would have been skeptical too. Like most other things that would become massively important later, this is brushed over, and I was still trying to piece things together and work out what was going on. Who was this person skulking around this mysterious jungle, touching Susan and leaving glass vials outside the TARDIS? What was in those vials, and why were they just left there? And for the love of God, what is a fluid link? We're finally at the city, and I have to say, the set design was simple but really effective. It felt sterile, and the amazing blank corridors really worked well with the futuristic vibe. Whilst the previous story nosedived into the historical element of Doctor Who, I was really happy that this was taking a step into the more science fiction, which is what the show would become known for in the future. There were a few creepy moments that indicated things were not all that it seemed. A security camera seemed to follow Barbara as she walked through a doorway, and a couple of doors silently closed behind her, cutting her off from the others. These simple moments were really impactful. They gave you just enough indication that something was wrong without forcing it in your face. But the cliffhanger was the real gem of the episode. As Barbara starts to realise that something is amiss, she attempts to double back, but finds herself completely cut off and trapped. As she looks around, she backs up against a wall and cowers in fear as something comes towards her. All we see is the end of a metal arm, and it's enough to show you that something crazy is about to go down in the next episode. I really enjoyed this episode because it set up so many interesting mysteries that demand answers right now. It's the kind of episode that makes you go, yes, I want to watch the next one immediately as soon as the credits start rolling. We've not witnessed the true threat of the story just yet, but you can already feel that something is building and brewing, especially since the TARDIS is currently out of action. New Who rarely has moments like this, so it was really nice to see this kind of cliffhanger used so effectively here. Now, you're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned the book at all within the first episode. And that's because the events of the book play out in a very similar way to the episode. Oh wait, that's a complete lie. The story is actually told in first person, and it's from Ian's perspective, and they completely change all of their backstories. Ian is indeed still a teacher, but is apparently attempting to get a job as a research scientist. Barbara is seemingly a lot younger than her TV counterpart and is nothing but Susan's tutor. But the biggest difference of all is that Barbara and Ian actually don't know each other, and they only meet when Ian stumbles upon a horrific car accident involving Barbara and a missing Susan. The book was actually published in 1964, and this is the 2011 print of it. I tried to get an older version of it, but this was the cheapest one out there, and I thought, it's the same book, I don't need an old copy of it. It's a little bit jarring jumping from the third person perspectives of all the other Target books, or at least most of them, to the first person perspective of Ian, but it does allow us to feel a little bit more emotion and feel more connected to Ian as a character as we're experiencing this brand new adventure through his eyes. The reason why the origin story was changed was because there was no concern for pre-existing lore surrounding these characters when it was written. A decision was made to rewrite their introduction so new readers could follow along with the story without having to know what happened in the very first story of Doctor Who. It was incredibly jarring to read at first, especially considering it told a completely different story. But once the TARDIS landed on Skaro, I was pleasantly surprised that we seemed to be back on track. Whilst I enjoyed the drama of the car crash and the pandemonium that was going on, I actually missed the quaintness of Totter's Lane. And I also missed the fact that we didn't get to see teachers stalking their students. I mean, that was the real highlight of the first episode, am I right? Also, one more addition was the explanation of what Ian did between the fluid link breaking and leaving for the city. In the book, it's expanded on, explaining that they actually went to sleep, and we get an extensive look at what the TARDIS offers in its bathroom. Not only is there a grooming machine, but there is also a machine that can cut your hair. I hate going to the barbers, so I feel like that machine would come in very handy for me. Overall, it was a fascinating explanation of a room we rarely get to see within the TARDIS. The Survivors was the second episode of the serial, and it aired on the 28th of December 1963. This is perhaps the strongest episode of all 7 because the feeling of dread reaches an all-time high in the opening moments of the episode, and it doesn't really leave you until the rather anticlimactic cliffhanger. We pick up where we left off, with Barbara being cornered by an unknown assailant, and then we cut to Ian, Susan and the Doctor wondering where she could have possibly gotten to. I mean, she's currently being cornered by one of the most vengeful, evil creatures in the galaxy. I feel like they're not panicked enough right now. With Barbara missing, the gang decide to explore some more and stumble upon the lab they'd been looking for. This is when we're slapped with a triple whammy of plot twists right out the gate that had me reeling for the rest of the episode. The lab contained a beeping noise that they narrowed down to a Geiger counter, explaining that the atmosphere was actually thick with radiation. Now that I'm saying this, can an atmosphere be thick with radiation? I'm not sure. I'm not a scientist after all. Either way, this confirms that they've been soaking in radiation since the moment they arrived here, and unfortunately, that can only mean bad things. When has radiation ever been a good thing in science fiction? The second plot twist came when the Doctor revealed that the fluid link was actually working fine and he just tampered with it so that they could explore the city. Do you remember when I said that the fluid link was going to be the cause of every problem in this story? Yeah, I think you're starting to work out why now. This entire situation could have been avoided if the Doctor's curiosity didn't get the better of him. But equally, that nefarious fluid link is the real issue here. What even is a fluid link? At this point, I feel like they're making things up as they go along. I also feel like Susan and Ian weren't as angry as I would have been about the Doctor's lies. This guy has led you into a city on a planet that is entirely radioactive. And you guys are like, "Ah, shucks, this is a real shame. What are we going to do?" I would have been screaming at that old man until he pissed himself. That's how angry I would have been. To make matters worse, as they left the lab, the Doctor, Ian and Susan were cornered by 3 Daleks, turning a bad situation into an infinitely worse situation. At this point, we might as well have ended the story here because they've lost Barbara, they've landed on a radioactive planet, and now they're cornered by the worst creatures in the entire universe. The stakes are high and somehow they only get higher from here. The Daleks order them to follow, but Ian attempts to run away from the Daleks and he gets shot with some kind of paralysis beam, which temporarily removes the use of his legs. I was in absolute shock when Ian got shot because I was like, this Donny is dead. But apparently, these Daleks have the ability to paralyze. Honestly, I feel like this is a massive deviation from what I'm used to, so took a second to get used to. I feel like it was a nice way to ease children into the idea that these new creatures were dangerous without being explicit about their capabilities to commit cold-blooded murder. Don't worry though, that won't last long, and the only person who gets paralyzed in this story is Ian, because he has plot armor. At this point, everyone has been placed within a small prison cell and they're kept under guard by the Daleks. We also discover that everyone has advanced radiation sickness, which explains some of the weird symptoms that the group have been experiencing recently. Are we really gonna let the Doctor get away with this? He's led them in to this hostile environment and has allowed himself and his companions to get kidnapped not once, but twice now in 2 stories. Are we being serious? Twice? It's all becoming a little bit ridiculous now. And at this point, I'm genuinely considering, is the Doctor the real villain of this show? How does this keep happening? We then get a massive exposition dump scene that answered a few questions I'd been having about the plot up until this point. The Daleks believe the Doctor and his friends are Thals. And once again, I use the word friend very loosely. We're told that the 1,000 Daleks are age-old enemies that survived the 1,000-year war, which ended with numerous neutron bombs being detonated, rendering the surface of the planet radioactive and uninhabitable. Honestly, the Doctor needs to pay more attention to that Geiger counter in the TARDIS because this is absolutely ridiculous. We'll actually get to see the events of the 1,000-year war in Genesis of the Daleks, which is a 4th Doctor story, and The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar, which are both 12th Doctor stories, so stay tuned for those. Another mystery was solved in the form of the random glass vials left outside the TARDIS. Turns out they might have been some kind of miracle elixir from the Thals that would have cured the ailing effects of radiation poisoning. So effectively, Doctor Who is teaching children that they should just drink mysterious liquids from bottles that they don't know what it contains. Right, I can definitely see that going down well. The Doctor pleads with the Dalek to allow one of them to go retrieve the glass vials from the TARDIS, and the Daleks agree to this. Wait, hang on a minute. The Daleks agreed to let one of them leave to go get life-saving medicine and then come back. Yeah, these pacifist Daleks are not cutting it, and I want a refund. Sadly, the only option is for someone to head back to the TARDIS to go get the vials, and Ian immediately volunteers himself until he falls over, not once, but twice, because his legs haven't recovered from the temporary paralysis. I was actually glad that Ian had a break from being the hero, but then was a little concerned when Susan seemed to be the only choice to go, considering the Doctor and Barbara were far too ill to trek back to the time machine. Also, Susan gave a really bullshit reason as to why she had to be the one to go, and it all came down to the locking mechanism on the TARDIS. Something about 40 different holes, and if you insert it at the wrong angle and unlock the wrong hole, and it's all very confusing. I didn't really understand it. It seemed like a really rubbish excuse. Like, Susan, if you want to go and be the hero, just go and be the hero. You don't need to make up bullshit like this. Suddenly, we jump to Susan in the jungle, navigating her way back to the TARDIS. I'd like to say that she was moving calmly and rationally, but that would be lying, and I don't want to lie to you guys. She was actually running hysterically through the trees, screaming and crying as she did so. Honestly, Susan is a much less interesting character than I initially anticipated. The way she's written right now boils down to her just being a crying damsel in distress, and occasionally she screams, and it's not exactly the most exciting character development, do you know what I mean? It's a little bit disappointing considering the legacy that this character has, but equally, I'm sure some character growth will happen. We are only 6 episodes into the show after all. The episode's cliffhanger saw Susan make it safely back to the TARDIS, despite all the running and screaming and crying. She picked up the vials, looked at them with glee in her eyes, and then walked out the door. And that's where the episode ended. I was actually fuming, because I was thinking, what kind of a cliffhanger is that? It's meant to make me want to watch the next episode, and I sat there going, oh, sick, she got the vials and has now just left the TARDIS. Cool. We ended the previous episode with an unknown enemy advancing on Barbara, and this episode ends with Susan simply walking out the TARDIS? This is just the first sign that this story might be losing steam, but fortunately, we have a long way to go before the action fully grinds to a halt. The 3rd episode of this serial is entitled The Escape, and it aired on the 4th of January 1964, making it the first episode to be aired that year. With the failed cliffhanger of the previous episode, I wasn't as hyped to start watching this one. I was actually surprised when the episode immediately had Susan bump into a strange man waiting for her outside the TARDIS. This should have been the cliffhanger, because immediately I was taken aback. Who is this man, and where did he come from? Is he one of the Thals that the Daleks were talking about? And what does he want with Susan? There were so many questions that kept me wondering and guessing what was going on. And that would have been the perfect place to end the previous episode. But no, we didn't get that. And I promise I'll stop banging on about it, but come on, guys. This is ridiculous. It was right there. Aladon, the Thal who was speaking with Susan, confirmed the glass vials were the cure for radiation poisoning, and even gave her some extra vials just in case. I think there was a short discussion about the possibility of the Daleks confiscating the remedy before they could cure themselves, so at least the Daleks would have the cure as a peace offering. I liked the idea of introducing another race of creatures for the Doctor and the others to encounter, but I was a little disappointed that they seemed to be explicitly humanoid, with the only garish difference being a cape, which Aladon gave to Susan as a gift. It seemed like there were flirty vibes between Aladon and Susan, and just to remind you guys, she is 15, so it was a little bit creepy. Wait, hang on. No, she's actually 97, so still creepy, just a different kind of creepy. Either way, I think we're going to have to get the register out for him. So I know that I mentioned in the last episode that characters seem to teleport around with seemingly no respect for the audience's spatial awareness, and I'm happy to report that nothing has changed.
I have returned the girl to the cell.
1 second, Susan is in the jungle outside the TARDIS talking to Aladdin, and the next, she is back in the city delivering the vials to the Doctor, Ian and Barbara. It is so unbelievably frustrating when I watch this show, and everybody's teleporting around. Like, how long is it taking you to get there? Give me some kind of indication, please. Susan informs the group that Aladon and the Thals are looking for something more than peace and food, which the Daleks overhear via some sneaky security monitors. I was actually surprised when the Daleks seemed happy with the idea of a treaty and were actually willing to put some terms to the Thals in order to work out some kind of deal. Sorry, let me get this straight. The Daleks, who are known as one of the most vicious, hateful creatures in all of the known universe, are willing to make peace and break bread with the Thals. Something doesn't quite seem right here, because the Daleks, they're acting very off. Talk about a personality transplant. I have to say that the Daleks were definitely treating their prisoners with respect, letting them sleep, providing them with food and water, and a whole bunch of other things. I'm surprised they didn't have a mental health counsellor in there with them, coaching them through their feelings about being prisoners. Honestly, I'd rate this place 5 stars on TripAdvisor. I would definitely return to the Dalek City B&B. However, they did force Susan to write a proposal to the Thals, expressing their want for a peace treaty, which was somehow sent to the Thals in the jungle. Again, lots of details were skipped over here, especially when it came to how the message was delivered. But with Doctor Who, sometimes you just have to go with the flow. The letter magically teleported there, just like Susan keeps teleporting in and out of the jungle. Honestly, with all their teleportation, how have they not escaped yet? Once again, I was slightly surprised that we were beginning to get some really fun and entertaining scenes, and the gang staging an argument followed by a fight was definitely one of the highlights of the story. They utilised this fake fight to damage the security camera, cutting the picture and sound from the Daleks' display. It was a wonderful moment because it showed them all working together to achieve a common goal, whilst acting like they were doing the complete opposite. With the Daleks in the dark, the gang were free to talk as plainly and clearly as they wanted. This was when they started to work out how the Daleks functioned, and I was actually intrigued to see where this conversation went. The working theory was that the Daleks were powered by some kind of static electricity. I think that's just for these Daleks in this story, because I'm fairly certain that other Daleks we've seen throughout the years in Doctor Who haven't required static electricity in order to move. I could be wrong, I don't know. It hasn't come up as a known plot point, for me at least. Either way, this discovery led to a rather risky yet rewarding plan to capture a Dalek. Honestly, these guys are so lucky that the Daleks in this story are pacifists, because I'm fairly certain that the Daleks in New Who would not have let them get away with this. Everyone would have been beamed before they even got close. The plan began with someone sliding something under the door when a Dalek came to check that their stay in the Dalek City B&B was going well. An alarm sounded and the Dalek came back, probably because he forgot to hand out his customer feedback questionnaires, but either way, he ordered them to take away the obstruction from the door. Fortunately, the team somehow overpowered it. Firstly, they smeared mud from their shoes on the Dalek's eye stalk. Then they pushed it onto the cape that Aladon gave Susan, and that broke the connection with the floor. Somehow, they'd managed to render a Dalek completely useless with relative ease. Genuinely, I was so impressed with this entire plan. Long gone are the days of these people randomly running into a cave to confront cavemen. No, This plan was intricately thought out and I was very impressed, I have to say. We're now living in the age of well thought out stratagems that lead to their intended outcome. What happened next genuinely shocked me because the Doctor and the gang decided to open up the Dalek. They never directly showed us the inside of the casing, and when they removed the creature inside, they did so with the cape, keeping it covered on the floor. All of this was probably done due to budgetary reasons, and the idea of having an uncovered Dalek would have probably blown the special effects budget. But I think that actually worked in their favour here. There was something creepy about not knowing what was inside of that casing that really had a grip on me, even though I know what they actually do look like. So we're currently 1 for 1 for good and bad cliffhangers, and we're also 3 episodes in without a single death. At this point, I'm concerned that these Daleks actually are pacifists, and I've misunderstood them the entire time I've been watching the show. Are they really the victims here? Is that what I'm hearing? Don't make me laugh. Anyway, back to the cliffhanger. Ian jumps into the Dalek's casing and manages to get it slightly operational. Once again, I was surprised that in the very first Dalek serial, we're starting to explore inside the casing, with a character jumping in to operate the shell. The camera pans over to Aladon's cape on the floor in the corner, and a creepy tentacle wiggles out from underneath. It was a freaky way to end the episode, and whilst this tease would ultimately add nothing to the plot, it was a nice way to make me feel uncomfortable. I would say this is a great cliffhanger, so we're now at 2-1. Time to talk about the book a little, because I have been neglecting it slightly. The reason is that the story has practically mirrored the TV show with very minor adjustments. The biggest changes are mostly omissions from the TV episodes due to the fact we're reading the book from Ian's perspective. Scenes like Barbara getting cornered by a Dalek were cut, along with the scenes involving the Doctor talking to the Daleks alone, and Susan going back to the TARDIS to get the vials. I think these omissions helped the story flow a little bit better, because often these episodes can feel a little bit bloated if we're focusing on all these different storylines, but really focusing in on Ian's perspective allowed the story to feel perfectly paced, I have to say. Another vast improvement over the TV show is they accurately show the passage of time very clearly. The trek to the city from the jungle is described as taking a couple of hours, and Ian noticed that 5 hours passed whilst Susan went to retrieve the vials from the TARDIS. It allows us to gain a better understanding of geography and timing, especially when the TV show constantly has characters teleporting around with no understanding of how long it's taken them to complete these journeys. Anyway, that's all I've got to report for now. So let's get back on with the episode. Anyway, that's all I've got to report on for now. So let's head on to the next episode, shall we? The fourth part of this serial was entitled The Ambush, and it aired on the 11th of January 1964. I think this is the last good episode before the story takes a little bit of a nosedive narratively in the next few parts, so stay tuned for that. I was starting to see a few cracks in this story, but fortunately the first 3/4 of this episode were pretty great, so the last quarter, it's forgivable, I guess. We more or less start where we left off, wheeling Ian through the corridors under the guise that they're being led somewhere by a Dalek. Ian eventually manages to get the shell operational and is able to move around like an actual Dalek. And it was yet another ridiculous plan concocted by the team that I assumed was going to work purely because the plot said it would. Doctor Who has a lot of these moments, but I feel like that's half the fun of it at the end of the day. Are you ready for a real shocker? The Doctor, Susan, Barbara and Ian, who is still rocking and rolling around in the Dalek casing, accidentally stumble upon another Dalek. I mean, who could have guessed that that would happen? Me. I guessed that would happen. Ian sees this as his golden opportunity to try out his best Dalek impression, and honestly, it wasn't too bad. The Dalek bought it for all of 20 seconds until it checked in with the other Daleks and realised that it was all a ruse, so I don't know whether this plan worked out for the best. By this point, the gang had sealed the door anyway, and they made sure that no Daleks could follow. It's at times like this that I miss the sonic screwdriver, because simple situations like this could have been solved with a quick little bzz, bzz. Like I said, it didn't take long for the ridiculous escape plot to be uncovered, and the Dalek outside actually sounded the alarm, which was really loud and really annoying. Cue the next 5 to 10 minutes of this annoying siren going meow, meow, meow. Yeah, it was so frustrating. I'm surprised I didn't lose my patience with it. Back in the room, Ian is struggling to get out of the Dalek casing, and the others aren't able to push him into the conveniently placed elevator either. Remember earlier when I said that this plan seemed to be going too well? Well, this was the snag that I was anticipating, because nothing goes flawlessly on this show, let's be honest. To make matters worse, the Daleks were cutting through the door, meaning they only had limited time to get away with this daring escape. I wasn't under the impression that they had the ability to cut through doors, as I specifically remember this moment happening in 2005's The Parting of the Way, as they attempt to exterminate Linda with a Y. I also have about 5 copies of the Battles in Time card, which says Laser Cutter Dalek, so that's the only reason why I made that link there. So, with the floor being demagnetized, meaning Ian can't move, and the lid stuck, meaning Ian can't leave, the Doctor, Susan and Barbara stay behind to help him out. Wait, no, that's incorrect. Sorry. They just leave him behind and take the convenient elevator all the way to the top of the city. Yes, they left him there. What were they thinking? Apparently, the Doctor hasn't quite adopted his no person left behind mantra, because the Doctor was practically itching to get out of there. As they reach the top of the elevator and send it down for Ian, the Daleks break through the door, just as the Dalek Ian was hiding in implodes. What do you mean the Dalek imploded? Where is Ian? Is he okay? He can't be dead already, surely. He's only been in 2 stories. Okay, guys, everybody take a deep breath, calm down, because obviously Ian just magically teleported out of there. Yeah, that's the best explanation I've got for you. I mean, everyone in this show has magical teleportation powers, so at least they're keeping some kind of continuity there. In the book, Ian easily gets out of the Dalek casing, which makes sense because the drama of being trapped in the Dalek and not knowing if he would survive is something that only really works on screen. As the narrator of the book, Ian being trapped in a place would grind the story to a halt and take the mystery and drama out of it, so probably wise that he got out of it easily. At the top of the city, Ian rejoins the group and they have a mini celebration as they work out how to get out of there. However, back at the bottom of the city, the Daleks are showing their true colours and they're no longer willing to run the Dalek City B&B. It's a revolt, guys. It's a revolt. They had one bad TripAdvisor review and suddenly it's all fire on them, kill them, let's get rid of them. God, honestly, guys, be careful with TripAdvisor. You don't know what maniacs are out there. As the gang struggle to find a way out of the room they found themselves in, I actually sat here realising this is what life is like for the Doctor without the sonic screwdriver. While some people may look down on it as an overused plot device allowing the Doctor to get himself out of situations easily, and other people may think that the writers use it to get themselves out of corners that they've written themselves into, I personally feel like this scene was a perfect example of why the Sonic exists. Do we really want to be watching the Doctor struggling to open doors every 2 seconds? Do we really want him to rock up to a computer screen and struggle to decode all the information? No. We want quick solutions to these really mundane problems so the plot can progress.
Can you explain your plan without using the word sonic screwdriver?
In the same breath, I thought Ian's plan to drop a statue on the ascending elevator was actually a very smart plan, which would usually have been solved by the Sonic snapping the cords of the elevator. Unfortunately, the Thals have arrived in the city before the Doctor and the gang had chance to warn them. Effectively, they are strolling right into a trap, with the Daleks finally gaining the opportunity to wipe out their enemy for good. It's actually crazy how quickly the Daleks switched up when they no longer had the upper hand on their prisoners. Suddenly it's all exterminate this, exterminate that. I am still waiting for the Daleks to get sassy because that is always my favourite Dalek trait. Whilst the others head back to the TARDIS, Ian stays behind to warn the Thals, which begs the question, how is he going to warn them? They just destroyed the elevator that goes back down, and Ian doesn't know his way around this amazing environment. Also, just a reminder that he has only just regained the use of his legs a few minutes, hours, days? I actually have no clue how much time is passing because everyone keeps teleporting everywhere. Once again, this is an example of the act first, think later mentality that all these characters seem to have. It's entertaining to watch, I guess, but then again, it's frustrating when things don't go their way and it could have easily been solved if they'd have just thought about it for a second. Obviously, the Thals walk straight into the trap, and the leader, Tomosis, delivers a very passionate speech about how they should unite and help each other. If this was any race but the Daleks, I actually think it might have persuaded them that peace was probably the better option. But clearly, the Daleks have mutated so far that they can't even remember why their hatred started in the first place. All they know is they have a primary motivation. The Daleks must survive, and everyone else must die. Ian actually managed to make it there in time and shouted at the Thals to get out of there, as the Daleks shouted, "Fire!" and lasers started to fly everywhere. I'm sure Terry thought fire was good enough for the moment, but it doesn't quite have the same effect as exterminate. However, the Daleks did kill Tomosis, so that is officially our first death of the episode. Yay! The death counter is finally at 1, guys. I know you've been excited for it. And yes, I did say death counter. I learned from my mistakes. Cause? Death by extermination. Rest in peace, Tomosis. You will not be forgotten. At this point in the book, this whole section was expanded a little more with a description given for how Ian escaped the Dalek ambush. 7 people are said to have died, with 1 person being cornered by Daleks, pinned to the wall, and executed, which was mental. Genuinely, this moment worked so much better in the book because it truly explained the severity of this horrific ambush. Also, the book uses the word exterminate quite freely, but the TV show tends to use the words fire, annihilate, and destroy, which don't actually have the same effect. The term exterminate would actually become more commonly used when Patrick Troughton became the Doctor, so I'll be sure to make note of that when it happens. This, for me, was where the episode started to tail off a little bit. The story just became a little bit repetitive from here, and we were hitting the same story beats that we've been hitting all along. I'm not saying it's bad from here on out, but there's not much mystery left, and it feels like there are certain moments that are designed to extend the story rather than serving any genuine purpose. Whilst the end of the episode gave us some much needed lore surrounding the planet Skaro, I was less than impressed that the episode's cliffhanger was less of a shock and more of a disappointment. As Ian and the surviving Thals made Kit back to camp and inform everyone what had happened, the Doctor insists that it is time that they set off. I was thinking, right, okay, we've had 4 episodes, we've wrapped up the plot, we've met the Daleks, they're cool, they've shown their true colours, they're dangerous. Let's leave it there for now. Let's enjoy our lives, let's move on to the next story, because we've got a good thing going. No, let's drag it out for 3 more episodes. I'm going to try not to get too angry and upset, because the end of this episode was particularly frustrating. Ian informs everybody that they can't just leave. And I'm thinking, why can't you just leave? Why are we here? What's going on? Well, the fluid link was taken when the Daleks searched him, and the fluid link is still in the city. When I tell you I groaned so loudly at this, I'm not even joking. I warned you that this fluid link would cause numerous issues in this story, and once again, this little piece of tech, yeah, it's ruined everything. It's ruined everything again, and I'm sick and tired of it. I was so pissed off, and rightfully so, because the next 3 episodes are dedicated to getting back into the city and finding the fluid link. I know you guys can't wait, and neither can I. The 5th part of this serial was entitled The Expedition. Not exactly the most enthralling title, but we'll roll with it, I guess. This is where things start to take a nosedive off the deep end, because the majority of this episode sees some very strange character writing and weird decisions that lead the story in a very peculiar direction. In fact, the most interesting storyline of the entire episode was actually the Daleks discovering more about themselves, and in turn giving us more insight into how they actually function. Let's start by talking about the Dalek storyline, because like I said, it's the best part of the episode. The Daleks have managed to replicate the drugs that the Thals gave to Susan and plan on rolling it out to all Daleks so they can leave the city and brave the radiation-filled world above them. I didn't quite appreciate that the Daleks were living underground, and probably had done for however long the planet has been radioactive. Now, I have a few questions about this whole vaccine process. How are they injecting themselves? Are they opening up the hood and then just like injecting it straight into the embryo? Or is there some kind of hole in the machinery where they can just like jab a needle in? Like, I need to know, because it has been keeping me up at night. How do they get their COVID jabs? Unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, the Daleks begin to notice a negative effect from the vaccine. It was quite scary to watch the Daleks given the vaccine begin to scream in pain as the vaccine evidently killed them. They'd only administered the radiation antidote to 2 sectors of Daleks, but soon they were all dead. Why did they all die, you might ask? Well, it was the vaccine that killed them. Come on, keep up, guys. But what they surmised from this concerning outcome was that the Daleks had adapted to the radiation, and in fact, needed it to survive. This was certainly a meaningful plot twist because it led the Daleks to move on to the next phase of their domination idea. If they need radiation to survive, and the radiation levels outside are dropping, then why not just nuke the atmosphere again to bring those levels back up? It was a dastardly plan and definitely set the stakes for the rest of this serial. I just wish the other half of this episode was as good as this, because this was top tier entertainment. Interestingly, this whole plan to nuke the atmosphere comes a lot earlier in the book. Evidently, the scenes involving the Daleks working out the vaccine is poison to them couldn't happen in a book where Ian is controlling the narrative. The pacing of the book places this revelation when they're trying to capture a Dalek to escape, which explains why the gang wanted to warn the Thals. I actually thought this was a much better explanation than the gang randomly working out that the Daleks are evil and wanting to warn the Thals themselves. Like, I didn't quite understand how that happened in the show, and I feel like I might have missed a moment or two, but either way, the book explained it so much better. In the book, they're explicitly told that the Daleks require radiation, and therefore they're going to nuke the atmosphere with neutron bombs. In the show, the characters don't find this out until the final episode, so this was definitely a big change. Okay, I'm gonna try and remain as impartial and unbiased as I possibly can about this dreadful, dreadful scene, because I have a lot of respect for Terry Nation as a writer. He's done a good job in the first 4 episodes, but he dropped a clanger here. With the fluid link back in the city, the Doctor is attempting to devise a plan to retrieve it, and the plan boils down to asking the Thals to head into battle with the Daleks. Never in the history of Doctor Who have I witnessed the Doctor willingly let people sacrifice their lives for him, at least none that I can remember. So the idea that he would want the Thals to fight just so he could get the fluid link back was ludicrous to me. Once again, the fluid link is the root of every single problem in this story, and I pray to God, after this serial is done, we never hear those 2 words again, otherwise I will kick off. So, unsurprisingly, Ian is against the plan to sacrifice the Thals for their cause, but decides to provoke Aladon, their new leader, into punching him so the Thals would be ready to fight the Daleks? At this point, I was kind of losing the plot and I was sitting there going, what is going on and what am I watching? Ian was being quite nasty, claiming he would take one of their women as a trade, and yet the Thals were still willing to help him after all of this? This was followed by a scene in which Barbara and Ganatus, who's another Thal, have a cheeky conversation, and it was very clear that there was some flirting going on. Ganatus briefly mentions the Lake of Mutations with the most horrifying creatures living in it, and I was actually really intrigued by this mention. I wrote down that I wanted the show to explore this, but considering the budgetary restrictions of this show, I don't know if they're gonna do it justice. I hate when I'm right, guys. The plan to attack the city was a really odd one, I have to say. First of all, the plan would be enacted in 2.5 days, which had me reeling because that seemed like absolutely ages. Considering at this point we'd already seen the Daleks ready to drop neutron bombs, I was concerned that this might be giving them too much time to put their plan into action. Imagine halfway through the expedition, the bombs just started dropping and then suddenly, game over. Would Ian, Barbara and Susan be going, ah shucks then? No, they'd be dead. Anyway, back to the plan, which saw the group split in 2. One half, led by the Doctor, Susan and Aladon, would enter the Dalek city through the front door to distract the Daleks, whilst the other half, led by Barbara, Ian and brothers Ganatus and Antidus, would trek through the swamp to enter the city from the back route. Once again, this plan seemed absolutely ridiculous, and I'm back to having absolutely no faith in these guys to actually come up with a coherent plan that would work without any setbacks. One day, these guys are going to come up with the best plan ever, and I'm going to have nothing snarky to say about it. Who am I kidding? That's never going to happen. So the swamp set was actually really cool for the most part, and definitely gave you the idea that you were in a radioactive swamp. However, my fears that they couldn't quite master the creepiness of the swamp filled with mutations was correct, because they attempted a few things that didn't quite have the effect I think they wanted. There was a moment where something appeared to be rising from the swamp, but this tease went nowhere, so I was disappointed. I think you have to take a lot of my comments with a pinch of salt, because I am watching them as someone in 2025, whereas I feel like someone watching in 1963 probably would have been a little bit creeped out by this. But equally, this is an example of the story not particularly aging well. The end of the episode came as quite a surprise because it came out of nowhere. I'm not usually one to be checking the runtime constantly to see how long is left, so often these cliffhangers sneak up on me. A Thal named Elion went to the lake to fill up their water bags when a mysterious whirlpool formed, causing him to scream for help. I had to ask myself why they were filling up their water bags in the radioactive lake of mutations, because that doesn't sound like it's particularly safe. I don't think I would want to drink that. I mean, it's not exactly Buxton or Evian, is it? Let's be honest. Whilst it wasn't shown explicitly in this serial, this is where Elion dies. So that means our death counter is up to 2. Ding ding. What's the cause of death, you might ask? Well, death by mysterious creature in a creepy whirlpool. I don't know, it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but it's unique at least. It caught me off guard, and that is a good thing. But equally, this was an entirely avoidable situation if they'd have just kept hold of the fluid link. God, I hate fluid links. A couple of things to note from the book's account of this episode's events are as follows. Firstly, a brief description of the mutations suffered by both races were described. Obviously, the Daleks mutated so much that they can only live inside metal casings, but the Thals have been described as mutating into effectively beautiful creatures. Yeah, you heard that right. They've mutated to remove any physical imperfection from the gene pool, which effectively means they're just a race of fit people now, so cool, I guess. Also, the boring scene in which Ian attempts to rile the Thals into helping them fight the Daleks is much longer in the book. Ian actually teaches the Thals how to box each other in an attempt to get them to understand physical violence. It doesn't really work, and this scene goes on for pages and pages until the same resolution is reached. I think it worked better in the books purely because there was more time for Ian to get frustrated and jump to the "we're going to send your wife to the Daleks for testing." It just made it feel a little bit more justified, even if it was still completely ridiculous. The 6th part in this serial is entitled The Ordeal, which is ridiculously nondescript and kind of dull for a title. I mean, surely every episode has to have some kind of ordeal, otherwise it would just be characters standing around having a cheeky gossip for 20 minutes. What makes this ordeal any different from the previous ordeals that we've seen in this story? Can you tell that this episode really pissed me off? Shall we start once again with the Dalek subplot? After all, it is the most interesting thing about this episode. Honestly, I think I would have rather just watched the Daleks stand around and chat for 20 minutes, like I said earlier. Effectively, this episode saw the Daleks working out how they could reintroduce radiation into the atmosphere. Their initial plan was to detonate a neutron bomb, but they discovered that plan would take 23 days to build a bomb capable of spreading radiation over 500 square miles. That's about 4/5 of the size of London, which is crazy to think about. Unfortunately, the Daleks would have to look into alternate methods to achieve their intended result. Let's transition to talking about the Doctor and Susan's part in this storyline. Their magical idea was to block the Daleks' communication channels so they'd have a better chance of surprising them. They do this by beaming light onto their antennas and using this downtime to sneak in without the Daleks being able to see them advancing. It was a relatively smart plan that worked extremely well until the Doctor and Susan were caught tampering with the static electricity control box. I can't tell if the Doctor is having horrific luck or he's just genuinely dumb at the moment. Obviously, tampering with the one thing that keeps the Daleks moving is going to draw attention to yourself. Was that the plan? Was that not the plan? Like, I don't understand what the plan was, because you kind of just bumble in and go, let's do it. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Daleks were having to work out alternate methods to increase their radiation levels, and the plan they landed on was to blow up their nuclear reactors. I was sat there a little bit dumbfounded at the stupidity on display here. Are these nuclear reactors not being used to power the city every day? Can they actually live without them? Why wouldn't you just wait the 23 days? Surely it's not that long. You can't be in that much of a desperate need to get radiation into the atmosphere. Either way, it seems like the poor decision making is contagious now, because even the Daleks are suffering from its afflictions. Well, we've spoken about the most interesting parts of the episode, so I guess it's time to discuss the absolutely abysmal main story of the episode. If you'll remember, we were left on the cliffhanger that a whirlpool had started in the Lake of Mutations, and a mysterious creature had dragged Elion into the waters, never to be seen again. There was a brief moment of sadness from everyone, and then, almost immediately, they pressed on with their mission. Clearly, no one liked Elion that much, because they all just pressed on without a second thought. Was he that bad? The book has a segment that I genuinely found gripping to read that could never have been done on the show in 1964 without it looking incredibly bad. The book features a battle between the Wanderers and the creature within the lake, which is described in a really graphic way. Ian and Christus, one of the Thals, managed to fight the creature and send it flailing back into the lake. It was genuinely a perfect moment that captivated my attention. I was reading, I was gripped, I was in it, and it just highlighted the issues of the TV episode. The fact that we were missing that kind of conflict and that kind of intrigue and moment, because we completely skimmed past that. Also, a moment later on described how the lake began thriving with 20 or 30 of those creatures feasting on the corpse of the one that Ian and Christus had killed. Genuinely, that bit was haunting to read. The fact that there was at least 20 of those creatures in there? Yeah, that's crazy. Could not be me going near that. At this point in time, I feel like I'm watching an adaptation of We're Going on a Bear Hunt, which, if you're not from the UK, is a very famous children's book here. The reason it's relevant is because the characters got to a point where they couldn't go over the mountain, they couldn't go under the mountain, so what were they going to have to do? Go through the mountain. Are we being serious, guys? And go through it they did, because the next portion of the episode takes place within the dimly lit confines of a cave. At this point, the action really grinds to a halt because the characters just wander through the cave attempting to reach the city with minimal moments of note. In fact, there was so many moments of just talking and discussing and what's the plan going to be that I genuinely started to daydream. I don't do that when I watch Doctor Who. I'm usually gripped. I'm usually in it. Why am I daydreaming? Ganatus and Antidus had an argument about whether they should press forward or turn back. Antidus is hesitant to continue because he believes that the Daleks will just kill them anyway when they reach the city. I hate to break it to you, Antidus, but it's either fight now and potentially win, or die when they let off the nuclear reactors. I don't know. I think there's a choice that I would be making here, and it's definitely not the wait and die section of that. Ganatus manages to convince him to continue, but then a rockfall occurs and Antidus is slightly injured by the falling debris. This moment should have been highly dramatic, especially because the rockfall cut off their way back, but instead I was just thinking, thank God, can we get on with the episode now, please? Next time we check in with this group of people, they're still travelling through the cave and still complaining about it. But now they've reached a huge gap in the cave. It seems like a pretty deep drop, and the lack of lighting really added to the tension and the drama here. Unfortunately, what we got was a drawn out, over-bloated scene in which we watched every single one of the expedition team jump across the gap, painstakingly, one by one. Ian went first and made it with relative ease, and slowly but surely, everyone's followed suit, except Antidus. I just wish this scene would have captured my attention like I knew it could have, but the pacing just felt glacial. We'd been in this cave for what seemed like the entire episode, and I was just getting frustrated that we were still dealing with this petty drama. However, I will hand it to the episode. The cliffhanger was stupendous. As Antidus prepares to make his jump, he is very clearly petrified of jumping across this gap. I can't blame him because I would have been the exact same. So when he jumped, I was impressed that he managed to overcome that fear. Sadly, he couldn't quite get his footing and fell into the ravine, which in turn pulled Ian down as well, as the rope was connecting both of them. The episode ended with Ian clinging on for dear life as Antidus flailed about below. It was a great cliffhanger that landed one of our characters in mortal peril, so already I wanted to watch the next episode just to see a swift resolution to this great moment. See, I can be positive about this episode. Fortunately, the final episode is a satisfying conclusion, even if there are moments that could have been cut down. Let's just say, I'm starting to realise why the Daleks in Colour special that they made was only 70 minutes long, instead of 150 minutes. That's too long for a story. The final episode of this serial is entitled The Rescue, not to be confused with the third serial in the second season, which introduced Vicky as the next long-term companion for the Doctor. This episode concluded the Dalek story arc with relative success, even if we did have a slightly shaky start. It definitely brought the action back from the brink of collapse, so I was definitely grateful to the episode for doing that. The episode started with Ian clinging onto the ravine edge for dear life as Antidus dangled below, flailing and screaming. I have to say the stakes were high in this moment because I wasn't sure what direction the show would take here. Fortunately, it made the move I was daring it to make, and we watched as Antidus cut his rope, allowing Ian to scramble up to the ledge. But in turn, Antidus sacrificed himself for the greater good. It was actually slightly sad, considering Antidus was the one that was concerned that this would all be in vain, and he actually turned out to be the next one to die. Either way, this is our third death of the story, so that means the counter is up to 3. Cause of death? Falling from a great height. Rest in peace, Antidus. In the book, his death is even more tragic because he doesn't actually sacrifice himself. The vine that they were using as a rope just snaps and Antidus falls to his death, landing in some water. And then the sounds of screams were silenced by some kind of water creature screeching as it discovered its next meal. Yeah, the book was kind of crazy for that explanation, I can't lie. So, with Antidus's corpse at the bottom of the ravine and everyone else safely across the ravine, the group decided that now was the perfect time to argue about whether to continue forward or not, as they'd managed to reach a dead end. May I remind you that turning back involves crossing that ravine again, which, I'm sorry, someone just died, and then also there is a massive rockfall that happened which was blocking your path back in the first place. So what's this plan to turn back? Explain your answer and show your workings very clearly, please. Fortunately, Ian noticed a crack of light shining through the wall, and when they bust it down, they realised they had broken into the Daleks' pump room. Finally, some good news at last, and we're also out of the cave. I never thought I'd see them leave that cave, so I'm very grateful. All I ask now is that we don't go back to a cave for a very, very long time. I mean, that's now 2 serials in a row where a main plot point of the show has been, oh, we're trapped in a cave. I'm kind of over it now, guys. So, a lot of things had to align correctly for the final battle to happen as expected. Firstly, the Thals had to sneak into the city now that the path was clear. Secondly, the Doctor and Susan, who were prisoners once again, had to distract the Daleks long enough for everyone else to arrive. And lastly, Ian, Barbara and their group had to make it to the control room at the exact same time as everyone else. A lot of moving parts and a lot of convenient timing, if you ask me. The Doctor and Susan actually found out about the Daleks' plan here, as opposed to much earlier in the novel, and I feel like this works nicely as an added stake for the Doctor to make things go well. He could have easily snatched the fluid link and been like, every man for himself, like he has been before, but I don't think the Doctor would risk getting caught in the middle of a nuclear explosion. I mean, it's just not ideal, is it? Interestingly, the Doctor offered the Daleks the knowledge of the TARDIS in exchange for the fluid link, which was a really weird moment. I'm so conditioned to know that the TARDIS's power cannot fall into the wrong hands, so this offer felt extremely naive of the Doctor. Sadly, the Daleks couldn't give 2 tosses about a time machine, so that was in vain. I mentioned the convenient timing earlier, and I'm pleased to report that everyone ran into each other just when they needed to. Some people may say that's disappointing writing, but I'm a sucker for these things happening at the last possible minute. And with a countdown ticking down, voiced by the Daleks, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread fill me. I was actually impressed that an episode of Doctor Who from 1964 was able to evoke that kind of emotion in me. I didn't expect it. As Aladdin meets up with Barbara, Ian, Ganatus, and some of the other Thors, they decide they should attack the control room at the same time to make sure that they have the upper hand. There was a moment in which these characters had to crawl under a closing door and people got trapped underneath, which helped add to the tension as the Daleks continued to count down. Sadly, one of the nameless Thors was executed and exterminated by the Daleks, so that means our death counter is up to 4. Cause of death, extermination. So, the episode takes a dramatic turn as our characters attack the Dalek control room. Once again, I'm reminded that the Daleks only become powerful over time, because these Daleks were the laziest creatures I've ever met. These guys ran at you, and you couldn't even get a shot on target. You just bumbled around, letting your evil plan be foiled by people throwing rocks at you? I have never been more disappointed in genocidal maniacs in my whole life. However, the Daleks did manage to kill one Thor in the skirmish, so I guess that's another point for the death counter. Yay! Cause of death, extermination. Christas, one of the Thals, was actually shot by one of the Daleks and survived. I genuinely wasn't even aware that that was possible, and it didn't seem like he was shot by a paralysis beam, so clearly this guy just tanked an extermination. Clearly, Christas is just built different, and I know that the death counter is angry because it was hungry for its next victim. So, how was this situation resolved, you may be asking? Calm down. Alright, be patient. I'll get there in a minute, alright? You've watched this entire video. You can wait a little bit longer, alright? They managed to disable the power supply for the city, rendering the Daleks completely immobile. And for some reason, this causes all of the Daleks to start dying simultaneously. I'm not entirely sure how that happened, but maybe the static electricity was giving them some kind of life force? That's probably the best explanation I have for this. The Daleks beg the Doctor to save them, and he said,
"Even if I wanted to, I don't know how."
It felt like a sad, somber moment rather than a dark moment for the Doctor, and I actually appreciated the way Hartnell played this moment. We're 2 stories in, and I'm already sensing that William Hartnell is a very, very strong character and a very, very good representation for the Doctor. So that is pretty much it for the story. We had a few loose ends to tie up, such as making sure they definitely had the fluid link, and then it was time for them to leave Skaro and continue on their travels. Before she goes back into the TARDIS, however, Barbara is caught by Ganatus, the Thal that she had been having a cheeky flirtatious time with throughout the story, and he delicately kisses her hand. This is probably the first time that we've seen a companion engage in a more romantic relationship with somebody, but trust me, it's nowhere near the last. It was a sweet moment and a nice way to tie up that little plot thread in a satisfying way. It is time for whoosh whoosh time, and fortunately this time, without a fluid link to go awry, we set off pretty much perfectly. However, mid-flight, there is an explosion on the console and suddenly our weary travellers are knocked to the floor and the screen fades to black. I like the fact that even at the end of the serial, they are teasing us with what's going to happen in the next story because it keeps viewers coming back. After all, at this point in time, Doctor Who is basically a weekly soap opera that has stories split into arcs, so you know what? I'm here for it. I like that vibe. It's cool. It's a shame that we're limited to 8 or 9 episodes a year nowadays, because this conclusion was a great cliffhanger and led us straight into the next episode. So, let's talk about this story as a whole. This is fundamentally one of the most important stories in Doctor Who history, introducing the Daleks and their genocidal capabilities, but also deepening the conflict between Barbara, Ian, the Doctor, and Susan. The first half of this story is paced to perfection, with the stakes high and the acting quality even higher. The second half of this story, it's not as good. The pacing is all over the place, there's boring segments, they get stuck in a cave for almost 2 episodes. It's just not great. It felt like the second half became a little bit of a fetch quest, and listen, I ain't here for fetch quests. The entire premise of this story is the Doctor lies to his companions, throws them into horrific circumstances, and then wonders how they got there. So I'm not entirely sure whether this is going to be a learning moment for the Doctor or whether that's just his character at the moment. I hope it's the former and that he doesn't keep landing his companions in mortal peril all the time. But then again, there is drama in that. So I realised in the last episode that I didn't actually give you guys any indication on my thoughts of the Unearthly Child, and I've decided to do an out of 10 ranking system for these episodes. The first episode was a perfect opening for the show, but the 3 episodes that followed it, they lacked pacing and sometimes had moments where I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. So overall, I would give An Unearthly Child a 7 out of 10 because it was good in places, but there were definitely moments that I think could have been improved upon. With the Daleks, it's frustrating that I can't give the first 4 episodes a 10 out of 10 because they were genuinely great episodes. Amazing. If the action had ended at the end of the 4th episode when they've arrived back at the TARDIS and then the fluid link is missing again, if they'd have just ended it there, they'd have gone in the TARDIS, happy days, I think that would have been a great conclusion. But instead, like I said, we get 3 episodes where it's basically just a fetch quest, and I was just a little bit disappointed. So overall, I would give this an 8 out of 10 because those first 4 episodes were incredibly strong, and whilst the back 3 episodes were not dreadful, there were moments that just prohibited this story from being an absolute all-timer. So that is all we've got time for today. We've got some exciting stories coming up. We've got The Edge of Destruction, which will be a shorter review, recap, and breakdown because it's only 2 episodes long. And then we throw ourselves into unknown territory. The episode after that is Marco Polo, and that is completely missing from the BBC archives, so I haven't been able to watch it anywhere. However, I have got the audio, and I also do have the book, so I will have a good understanding of what the story is about. So if you guys have enjoyed the Daleks and my breakdown of it, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this to all your Doctor Who friends if they're interested, and thank you guys for watching. This has been a lot of effort and a lot of work, so I hope you guys do appreciate it. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. See you guys later. Bye now. See ya.